They told me it was over. That my years of service, my loyalty, my sacrifices meant nothing. That the time had come for me to leave. My name is Akinwell Akin Obafemi, and what happened that day in the council hall of Olumide Trading Post would change everything, not just for me, but for everyone who believed that power could erase honor. I still remember the morning like it was etched into my bones. The sun had barely stretched over the horizon, and the village was quiet except for the distant crowing of the rooster and the low murmur of the river cutting through the farmland. I carried nothing but my leather satchel, the ceremonial staff my father had once handed me when I became the youngest apprentice at Olumide Trading, and a small carved ivory pendant that had always reminded me of patience and wisdom. I had served the elders, the traders, and the council for 27 years. I knew every ledger, every trade route, every whispered scheme in the marketplace. I had sacrificed festivals, weddings, and even my own health to ensure the prosperity of our people. Yet here I was, standing outside the council hall, knowing that my life's work might vanish with the simple swing of the doors. The doors opened with a soft creak, and I was greeted by the cold gaze of Chief Ikundeo, newly appointed, ambitious, and blind to the wisdom of age. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did. And behind him, the council members, some newly elected, some long time, watched in silence as if waiting for the spectacle to begin. Akinwell, Chief Ikundeo said, his voice cutting through the hall like the edge of a machete. Your services are no longer required. The time has come for renewal. Olumide must grow, and you are an obstacle. For a moment, my brain didn't register the words. 27 years, and in a single breath, they tried to erase me. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands trembling slightly, clutching the staff that had guided me through storms, droughts, and bandits. I wanted to speak, to argue, to remind them of everything, but the whole silence pressed against me like a weight. Even the youngest apprentices, who had always respected me, looked away. Pity filled their eyes, and it burned like salt on an old wound. Then Chief Ikundeo slid a folded parchment toward me. His fingers barely touched it, and I could see the gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. This, he said, his tone final, marks the end of your chapter here. Olumide moves forward, and you will step aside. I set down the staff on the worn wooden floor. Its familiar weight, the grooves carved by my father, reminded me of patience. And as my eyes fell on the parchment, I realized something. They thought this dismissal was the final act. They couldn't see the first move I had already made, days before this very morning. 2 nights earlier, I had received a visitor. Not a trader, not a council member, but the unseen hand behind Olumide's founding, Baba Ifedeo, the village elder who had long retired to the hills, watching from the shadows as the trading post grew into a kingdom of influence. His eyes, sharp as flint, had scanned me the way one scans embers for fire. Akinwell, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder, they may push you out, but the true measure of a man is not in what they take from you, it's in what you hold in secret. He handed me a small satchel, unassuming, worn from decades of handling. Inside were the original deeds to the trading routes, the ledgers of the families who had entrusted their goods to Olumide generations before me, and an ancient seal, proof that the real authority had never rested entirely with the council. Use this wisely, Baba Ifedeo whispered. The moment you appear powerless is the moment you wield power unseen. Let them see the end, but the story is far from over. I had returned to my small quarters that night, laying the documents and the seal before me. My mind raced, not with revenge, but with strategy. Every word, every gesture of Chief Ikundeo and his council could be turned against them, but timing was everything. Patience was the weapon of the wise, and I intended to wield it. Now, as I stood in the council hall, the parchment before me, the younger traders whispering and the elders nodding at Ikandeo's performance, I felt a cold clarity settle in my chest. This was not humiliation. It was the beginning. The beginning of a lesson they would never forget. I walked toward the exit, staff in hand, my steps measured. Every eye followed me. Some pitied, some mocked, some envied. None suspected what I carried in my satchel. None realized that the weight of my silence was heavier than the judgment of any council member. Outside, the morning air carried the scent of wet earth and the river, sweet and unassuming. I breathed it in, letting patience calm the rising fire within me. The villagers might see me leaving, the council might think me broken, but in the shadows, power had already shifted. The real story had not yet begun. As the sun climbed higher, I began retracing the paths I had known all my life. Each alley, each market stall, each trading post I had nurtured. And in the rustling of the palm leaves, I heard whispers not just of gossip, but of opportunity. I was already weaving the threads of a plan, and by the time Chief Ikandeo realized the true authority of Olumide rested not in his seat, but in the hands of the one he had dismissed, it would be too late. For now, the story was just beginning. And this, my friends, is how it all began. The day I was fired, the day they thought the tale ended, and the day I began writing my own legend. The village was alive, though no one knew it. Birds chirped, children ran with baskets of yams and cassava, and traders set up their stalls along the winding paths, each trying to outshine the other. To them, I was just another man walking through the morning mist, leaving the council hall behind. But beneath the calm, my mind was a storm. Every step, every glance, every nod from a passerby carried meaning now. I wasn't just planning to survive, I was planning to reclaim everything that had been taken from me. I reached the edge of the river where the old wooden bridge creaked with every gust of wind. Here, Baba Ifedeo had taught me patience, and here, I could think freely. I placed the satchel down and opened it, careful not to let anyone see its contents. The parchment glimmered faintly in the morning light, deeds, ledgers, the seal of authority older than the council itself. They think this dismissal ends me, I murmured, almost to myself. But they've only begun to write the first page of my story. I traced the seal with my finger, feeling its grooves, its history, its silent warning. Power is never given lightly, and those who underestimate it pay dearly. I remembered Baba Ifedeo's words, echoing through my memory like a drumbeat in the night. Appear powerless, act quietly, strike when arrogance blinds them. Arrogance. That word rolled in my mind as I imagined Chief Ikandeo striding through the council hall, chest puffed, eyes gleaming with self-importance. He believed that age and wisdom were no match for ambition. How little he knew that ambition without patience is a weapon pointed at the one who wields it too soon. The plan began forming, thread by thread. First, I would need allies, those who still remembered the years, the sacrifices, the nights spent salvaging losses, defending the village's honor against traders who would have eaten us alive. I needed to remind them of loyalty and trust, not with speeches or threats, but with proof. I stood and began walking back toward the marketplace, moving through the stalls like a shadow. The bakers, the palm wine sellers, the young apprentices, all greeted me warmly, yet I could sense the hesitation behind their smiles. News traveled fast in Olumide, and I knew whispers of my dismissal had already reached every corner. Every eye I passed became a potential ally or informant. I had to be careful. Every move mattered. By mid-morning, I reached the old trading house on the outskirts of the village, the one with the high ceilings and creaking beams, where I had trained my first apprentices decades ago. Dust covered the floor, but the air was thick with memories. This would be my war room. My hands trembled slightly as I unpacked the satchel, laying out the ledgers, the deeds, and the seal. I studied them carefully. There was a rhythm here, a sequence I could use. Every trader had a debt, every route had a record, and every family who entrusted goods to Olumide had a legacy. If I called upon them correctly, they would be my army, invisible yet unshakable. But before I could plan the first move, my satchel shifted. A shadow fell across the doorway. "Going somewhere, Aikenwale?" I froze. The voice was smooth, confident, with a hint of mockery. I looked up to see Moreo, Ikundeo's closest confidant, stepping into the trading house. She had always been clever, ambitious, and dangerously observant. Her eyes flicked to the satchel, then back to me, as though testing whether I had the courage to act under her scrutiny. "Just thinking," I replied, keeping my tone calm, measured. "Plans take time, Moreo. You know that better than anyone." Her lips curved into a half-smile, and she circled slowly, eyes lingering over the ledgers. "Time is precious, Akin. Some of us don't have the luxury of waiting while others stew in pride. You could lose everything in a moment if you hesitate." I met her gaze steadily. And yet, hesitation is often the difference between victory and defeat. You should remember that. She raised an eyebrow, a challenge in her silence. Then, almost casually, she stepped back. "Be careful, Aikenwale. Not everyone remembers the old ways, and not everyone forgives so easily." The shadow of her warning lingered long after she left. I knew she would report back to Ikundeo. That was fine. Let them think they had insight. They didn't. Not yet. By noon, I had arranged the first steps of my plan. I would begin with the apprentices, those who had grown up under my guidance. They were loyal, not out of fear, but out of respect. I called them one by one, showing them the satchel, explaining the deeds, the seal, and the true weight of authority. Eyes widened as they realized what I held. Their whispers became hushed exclamations, full of awe and fear. "Akin, this changes everything," one murmured. "The council has no power over you if this is true." Exactly. That was the first wave. And as I watched them leave, carrying fragments of knowledge that would ripple through the village, I felt the tension build in a satisfying way. The council believed they had silenced me. But I was already moving pieces on a board they hadn't even noticed existed. The next step required subtlety. I moved through the market, speaking quietly to traders I had known for decades, reminding them of contracts, agreements, and the sacred trust of Olumide. Each person who nodded, each hand that grasped mine in acknowledgement, became part of the invisible net I was weaving, a net that would tighten around the arrogance of Ikundeo and his council. By evening, I returned to the river bridge, my mind buzzing with calculations. The sun had dipped low, casting golden light across the water. Shadows stretched long, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself a thin, satisfied smile. They thought firing me would end my story. They thought the council held the power. But they had forgotten one simple truth: authority is more than a title. It is history, loyalty, and the unseen trust of those who follow quietly. And tomorrow, the real game would begin. Because power is rarely taken in a roar. It is claimed in silence. Dawn had barely broken when I left my quarters, the mist curling around my feet like a silent audience. The village was stirring, merchants setting up stalls, chickens scratching in the dust, the river gurgling lazily as if it knew nothing of the storm I was about to unleash. I carried the satchel close to my chest, and with it, the weight of decades of loyalty, of trust, of knowledge the council had foolishly dismissed. Chief Ikandeo believed he had removed a relic, a man whose time had ended. But he did not know that the relic was a cornerstone. And now, the first cracks in his authority would appear. My first stop was the marketplace. The apprentices I had briefed yesterday were already there, blending in with the traders as if nothing had happened. I handed each a small piece of information, carefully encoded: names, routes, debts, promises made to the council that had never been honored. Each whisper, each subtle gesture, was a seed. And like seeds in fertile soil, they would grow quietly, unseen, until the time came to bloom. I moved with deliberate calm, greeting each trader, speaking just enough to spark curiosity, leaving questions that would gnaw at their minds until they sought the answers themselves. The villagers would become my eyes, my ears, and, most importantly, my leverage. By mid-morning, a subtle tension had begun to ripple through Olumide. Traders exchanged glances, apprentices whispered behind their hands, and I caught the fleeting panic in the eyes of those who had once reported directly to Chief Ikandeo. I smiled, though quietly, letting it remain hidden behind my calm exterior. Every step of the plan depended on the illusion that nothing had changed. Then, as I approached the council hall, I saw them, Ikandeo and his inner circle, striding through the long veranda, their heads high, voices loud, exuding triumph. They believed victory was theirs, but the slightest misstep, a word spoken to the wrong person, a ledger revealed to the wrong trader, and the balance would tilt. I paused, letting them pass, unnoticed for now, my shadow trailing just far enough to be seen by the observant. It was time for the first formal move. I entered the old trading house once more, sat cross-legged on the floor, and opened the satchel. The seal glinted in the sunlight streaming through the cracked window. I took a deep breath and began writing. Not letters, not complaints, not petitions, but records. Every broken promise, every unfair trade, every hidden ledger that proved the council's incompetence. Each line was deliberate, each paragraph a silent accusation, each page a carefully prepared weapon. Hours passed, and as the sun climbed high, the first message arrived. An apprentice slipped in through the back door, breathless, a folded note clutched tightly in hand. "Sir," he whispered, "Ikandeo is asking questions. Traders are talking. He doesn't know who started it, but..." His eyes widened. "He feels the pressure." I allowed myself a slow nod, a single smile curling at the edge of my lips. Perfect. The first tremors had begun. By late afternoon, the council convened for a minor trade review, a routine they believed I had no influence over. I was not invited, of course, but that did not matter. Through subtle signals and whispered inquiries, I ensured that every question they asked, every ledger they referenced, was already undermined. Traders arrived with accurate counts, debts reconciled, and records corrected, all without revealing my hand. The room inside must have felt strange, the careful construction of authority beginning to wobble under invisible hands. I imagined Ikandeo's face as he realized numbers didn't align, as traders repeated facts he hadn't accounted for, as apprentices spoke with knowledge he assumed only the council possessed. And yet, the most satisfying part was seeing his arrogance remain intact. He believed the inconsistencies were minor, manageable. That was his mistake. Arrogance always overestimates control. By evening, the market buzzed with murmurs I had carefully planted. Traders spoke of unseen guidance, apprentices of wisdom beyond their years. The council members, walking back to their quarters, would overhear these whispers. Suspicion would creep in. paranoia would grow. And every misstep, every hesitation, would be mine to exploit. I returned to the river bridge, my mind replaying the day. The mist had returned, curling around the wooden planks as if hiding secrets in its folds. I let myself a small grin. The first move was subtle, a ripple rather than a wave, but ripples grow into floods when guided by patience. And then I felt it, the thrill of unseen power. Power doesn't always roar. Often, it whispers, unseen, unnoticed, until the world shifts beneath your feet. Tomorrow, I would raise the stakes. Tomorrow, Ikundeo would begin to understand that dismissing a man of patience and knowledge is a dangerous gamble. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of the council hall, I knew someone would start asking, who is really in control? The morning air was thick with the scent of wet earth and smoke from cooking fires. By now, news of my so-called dismissal had spread beyond the council halls, curling through the village like a silent storm. Traders whispered in the market, apprentices glanced nervously at one another, and even some council members began to feel a faint, unexplainable unease. I walked through the winding paths of Olumide Trading, the satchel pressed against my side, my eyes scanning every face, every gesture. Every person I passed carried a message I didn't need to speak aloud: loyalty to the past, respect for sacrifice, and the knowledge that sometimes patience is the deadliest weapon of all. By mid-morning, I reached the old granary at the edge of the trading post, a place no council member dared visit without a reason. It was here I had hidden the first critical piece of my plan, the ledgers and contracts Ikundeo thought were buried in bureaucratic archives. Dust hung in the beams, the smell of dry grain thick, but the importance of what lay inside was heavier than the air itself. I unlocked the door, sunlight streaming in, and carefully arranged the ledgers across a long wooden table. Every line, every entry, was a record of loyalty, trust, and commitment, and every one contradicted Ikundeo's newly claimed authority. The apprentices arrived quietly, as trained. I handed them folded papers and whispered instructions, each subtle enough to avoid immediate detection but precise enough to cause confusion and doubt when implemented. "Remember," I said softly, "your eyes are my eyes, your words are my voice. Let them see the cracks, but never the hand that planted them." Hours passed. Slowly, the first tremors began. Traders appeared in the council hall with corrected accounts, pointing out miscalculations that no one else had noticed. The council, relying on these figures, was forced to pause, to reassess, to admit, even if only internally, that something was off. Ikundeo's confidence, that armor he wore like gold, began to tarnish. I imagined his brow furrowing, his footsteps faltering, the tiny cracks in his control widening. But still, he remained unaware of the real source of the disruption. By late afternoon, I moved to the final stage of today's plan, the apprentices delivering news to influential families in Olumide who had been wronged, whose goods had been mismanaged under the council's oversight. I had provided them with proof, contracts, receipts, notes, everything meticulously documented. One by one, they approached the council members, politely questioning decisions, requesting clarification, pointing out inconsistencies. At first, the council tried to dismiss them. But as more families arrived, armed with evidence, murmurs of doubt grew louder. And somewhere in that cacophony, Ikundeo began to sense something he couldn't name. It was then that I knew the dominoes had begun to fall. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the trading post, I stood on a small hill overlooking Olumide. From here, I could see the council hall, its windows glowing faintly in the evening light. Inside, the meetings had grown tense, arguments whispered behind closed doors, and the once unshakable confidence of Ikandeo was cracking. And yet, I remained patient. The final move, the one that would expose not just his arrogance, but his blind ambition, would come at the perfect moment. Not a moment too soon, not a moment too late. For now, I let the village carry the story for me. Every whisper, every corrected ledger, every quiet confrontation became a pulse in the rhythm of my plan. Ikandeo believed he was still in control, but control is often an illusion, a fragile mask that shatters the moment patience meets cunning. As darkness fell, I returned to my quarters, sat beside the river, and allowed the first real smile of satisfaction to cross my face. They had dismissed me, humiliated me, tried to erase me, but I had already moved pieces they didn't know existed. The true power of Olumide Trading had never been in the council's hall. It had always been in the hands of those who understood loyalty, history, and the weight of unseen authority. Tomorrow, the final stage begins. The day Ikandeo learns that arrogance blinds more than it empowers. And the day the village realizes that sometimes, the quietest voice carries the heaviest weight. Because today was only the beginning. And the dominoes are just starting to fall. The sun had barely touched the horizon when I walked toward the council hall. The morning mist clung to the earth like a secret, hiding my movements from prying eyes. Today, everything would change. The dominoes I had carefully set in motion were now trembling, waiting for the final push. I carried only the satchel and the silver pen, symbols of patience, proof of loyalty, and the weapon no one suspected. The streets of Olumide were quiet, yet alive with whispers. Traders, families, and apprentices passed in hushed groups, eyes darting toward the council hall, curiosity flickering like fire in their gaze. They knew something was coming, though none could predict the force behind it. As I reached the hall, the doors loomed tall and imposing, the carved wooden panels polished to a shine that reflected authority. Ikandeo and his inner circle were already inside, their voices a low murmur of arrogance. I paused just beyond the threshold, letting my presence remain hidden for a moment longer. Timing was everything. Too soon, and they would brace themselves. Too late, and the impact would be muted. Inside, I could feel the tension radiating. Council members shifted nervously, glancing at one another, unsure why the village was buzzing with so many questions. Ikandeo's face was taut, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the open windows where sunlight had begun spilling across the polished floor. I stepped forward. One step. Then another. My boots echoed softly against the hall's stone floor, a rhythm that drew attention without alarm. The murmurs stopped. Every head turned. And then, the silence hit. I walked into the center of the hall, satchel in one hand, silver pen in the other. Ikandeo's eyes widened, the first crack in his armor. He opened his mouth, started to speak, but the words faltered before they left his lips. "You shouldn't be here," he stammered, voice tight, almost unrecognizable. I smiled, calm as a river. "And yet, here I am," I said. "Because authority isn't given. It's earned. And power? Power belongs to those who understand the weight of loyalty, not arrogance." The council stiffened, sensing the shift. Whispers began among the members. The apprentices had done their work. Traders had spoken. Families had brought forward evidence. And now, all at once, the unseen force I had orchestrated pressed down upon them. I set the satchel on the polished floor and opened it, letting the contents spill slightly: ledgers, contracts, receipts, proof of every mismanaged deal, every broken promise, every hidden record that undermined Ikandeo's authority. The room went still. Ikandeo's eyes darted over the documents, disbelief giving way to panic. This can't be. He faltered again. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the confidence he had worn like armor for decades. I knelt to pick up a ledger and spoke deliberately, letting each word sink. Every promise broken, every favor denied, every deceit hidden behind arrogance, it's all here. And the village remembers. Olumide remembers. A hand raised tentatively from the council. One of the senior members, long a supporter of Ikandeo, spoke softly but firmly. It seems we have been misled. Perhaps our trust in the council was premature. Another nodded, hesitant at first, then with conviction. The records are clear. Akinwell has the authority the council claims, and more importantly, the loyalty of those we serve. Ikandeo's face paled. The mask had shattered. Every whisper, every report, every careful move I had made came together in this moment, a storm he could no longer contain. I stood, silver pen in hand, and let the quiet authority fill the room. You dismissed me as powerless. You thought a single word could erase decades of service, decades of sacrifice. But power isn't a title. It's proof. And proof is what you just witnessed. Ikandeo tried one last plea, his voice cracking under the weight of the room. You can't. The council, the traditions. I raised the pen, letting it catch the morning light. Traditions are only meaningful when they are honored. Leadership is only respected when it is earned. And respect? Respect cannot be commanded through arrogance. It must be proven. Silence fell. The council's murmurs had turned to awe, fear, and reluctant acceptance. Ikandeo slumped into his chair, defeated. Not with a dramatic collapse, but with the quiet, unyielding acknowledgement that his time had ended. I walked to the head of the hall, placing the pen and the ledger on the table with deliberate calm. Every eye followed me as I took my seat, the center of authority no longer in question. From this moment forward, I spoke. The village, the traders, the council, all will report through me. Not because I demand it, but because I have earned it. And those who seek to disrupt loyalty, tradition, and justice will find that patience has teeth sharper than any arrogance. A ripple of relief, awe, and understanding spread through the room. The apprentices, the traders, even some council members dared to lift their heads and nod, their respect clear in their eyes. Ikandeo sat back, pale and broken, the lesson finally sinking in. Authority without wisdom is fragile, arrogance without patience is self-destruction, and loyalty, once lost or ignored, can be reclaimed, quietly, strategically, and irreversibly. I picked up the silver pen, turning it in my hand like a key. The village had seen, the council had seen, and the world, small as it may be, had remembered that justice rarely shouts. It arrives quietly, with careful planning, patience, and the wisdom to wait for the perfect moment. And today, the perfect moment had arrived. The sun was low, burning gold along the edges of the horizon, as I walked through the village of Olumide. The market buzzed, but it was a different rhythm now, one of respect, of quiet acknowledgement, and of careful attention. Traders and villagers glanced my way, not with fear or curiosity, but with the recognition of someone who had acted wisely, decisively, and with patience. I carried the satchel lightly now, no longer heavy with plans or secrets. The silver pen, tucked safely in my pocket, had done more than mark agreements. It had marked the turning of an era. For decades, I had believed loyalty, service, and sacrifice could be overlooked. Today proved otherwise. Families I had helped, apprentices I had trained, and even the hesitant council members now nodded as I passed. Each face told a story, the quiet acknowledgement that justice, when earned and timed perfectly, arrives not with fury, but with an unshakable calm. Inside the council hall, Ikundeo remained, silent, seated at the table he had once thought would hold him unchallenged. He no longer spoke loudly or arrogantly. His eyes, however, told the story more clearly than words ever could, a story of lessons learned too late. I stepped inside, carrying only my presence and the calm authority that came with it. Every council member looked up. Some bowed their heads respectfully. Some still tried to mask surprise. But all understood, without a word, that the balance had shifted. I spoke, my voice steady, deliberate, but not harsh. Authority is more than a seat at a table or a title. Leadership is not a demand, it is a responsibility. Those who forget the weight of their decisions will one day be reminded by the patience of those they dismiss. A pause hung in the air. It was heavy, measured, but not cruel. This was not revenge. This was truth. The kind of truth that sinks in quietly, like roots growing deep beneath the surface, unseen but unbreakable. Outside, apprentices and villagers continued to carry messages and correct lingering mistakes. The quiet power I had set in motion moved like a living thing, a network of eyes, hands, and voices aligned not by fear, but by principle. Later that evening, I returned to the river, where the mist curled around the wooden bridge like an old friend. I leaned on the railing, watching the water flow steadily, never questioning its path, never rushing. It reminded me of my own journey, patient, deliberate, and ultimately unstoppable. The lessons of the past weeks crystallized clearly. Patience carries power, humility hides strength, and sometimes the most quiet, calculated moves are the ones that shake empires. I opened the satchel one last time, not to retrieve a plan or check a ledger, but simply to reflect. Every document, every secret, every careful move had led to this moment. No grand speeches were necessary. No shouting. No ostentation. Just the quiet acknowledgement that justice had been restored, not for spectacle, but for the principle it upheld. And as night fell over Olumide, I finally allowed myself to sit. The silver pen glinted faintly in the moonlight, a reminder that what is given with trust and used with wisdom never loses its weight. From the distant council hall came faint murmurs, not of rebellion, not of fear, but of acknowledgement. The villagers would remember, the apprentices would remember, and the council would remember. Every action, every choice, every moment of patience had left a mark that would outlast anyone's arrogance. I smiled quietly. This was more than a victory. It was a legacy. Not one written on stones or titles, but in the hearts of those who had seen what true leadership looks like. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew this story was only beginning. For those who had watched, waited, and endured, the lesson was clear. Patience is not weakness. Loyalty is not invisible. And true power does not roar, it arrives quietly, like a river, unstoppable and enduring. I rose, walked back toward the village, and let the night embrace me. Every shadow seemed less menacing now, every whisper less uncertain. For I had not only reclaimed what was lost, I had shown that wisdom, patience, and steadfast resolve could outlast arrogance, and that true leadership is measured not in titles, but in the respect earned, quietly, over a lifetime. And with that, the village of Olumide slept, unaware that the quiet man they had dismissed had reshaped its destiny forever.